Hello, my name is Alex, and in this video we're going to be building our own personal coding assistant as a replacement for GitHub Copilot with the ability to autocomplete code for us and generate functions on the go. And we're going to achieve that by using Tabby and the StarCoder LLM or any other model of your choice. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see how all of this works. So let's say that you're looking for a self-hosted Copilot alternative, meaning that you're looking for an assistant which can be run locally on your machine without an internet connection, and then that assistant should be able to provide you code autocompletions and generate functions for you. So for example, in this case, I have a project which I've made for a different video, which is essentially a server for a webmail client. And in this case, I've deleted my send email function. So basically, I want to reconstruct that endpoint. And in this case, I can just simply say send, let's say send email like this, and I can press tab. And as you can see, it auto-completes everything for me. I have to wait for every autocompletion to be generated, and then I can press tab to fill in the generated code, like so. So as you can see so far, everything works fine, but it struggles a little bit with the placement of the catch statement. So we're gonna fix that. So we're just gonna say, we're gonna move it down here, and then we are going to close our endpoint like so. And now we can save. And as you can see, it did a very good job considering the context of this server. Now, having that said, this is not a perfect tool, and it is kind of inferior to Copilot if I'm being honest, but generally if you're looking for a solution which is an alternative to Copilot and it is not paid, then this is one of the best solutions out there. But having that said, Tabby allows you to use different models, meaning that in the future, if a better model comes out, or if your PC is capable of handling larger models, then you can probably reach the performance of Copilot on many levels. So having that said, let's see how Tabby works. Now, first of all, Tabby is an extension that can be installed with Visual Studio Code. So you want to go to extensions and you want to download and install Tabby. Then after you install Tabby, you can click here and you can go onto settings. And as you can see, Tabby wants an endpoint. Now, an endpoint should be a server running on your local machine, and we will discuss that in a second. And then it also allows you to select the trigger mode, so basically whether the autocompletions are automatic or not, the manual trigger mode settings, and you can also disable the usage of tracking, meaning that if you want everything to stay on your machine, then you can do that. So if you don't like Copilot because your code is uploaded somewhere else, then this solves that issue. Now, basically, the idea here is that you can select and run any of the available models, and then once you do that, you're providing the endpoint that runs the model to the extension, and the extension leverages that model to provide you with autocompletions. Now, let's go into the official website for Tabby, and here we can see a simple example of Tabby in action. And we want to go to documentation, and down here you have a models registry. So these are the models that you can use. You have support for the StarCoder model, which I found to be the best so far. You have Codellama and you have Deepseek Coder. Now these models, each one of these models come in different varieties. So this comes with the 1 billion parameter version, with the 3 billion parameter version, and with the 7 billion parameter version. Likewise, the Codellama model and the Deepseek Coder model also come with separate versions. Now, if you have a beefy machine, you can go for the versions with more parameters, but I do have to warn you that the performance will be slower. So to begin with, I recommend using the StarCoder 3 billion parameter model for a balance between suggestion speed and quality of code. Now, if you go lower, you will see a decrease in the quality of the suggestions, and if you go higher, you will see a decrease in the actual speed of suggestion generation. Now, if you're familiar with Codellama, and this is a small tangent for people who are familiar with Codellama, then you can go and find these models on the official Codellama website as well. So in here, if I type StarCoder, you will see that the model is also available here. And if you go into tags, you can see the models, the different versions of the model down here. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because these models are available to the public under a specific license, and you don't need to use Tabby specifically to leverage these models. Tabby is simply a tool which makes it convenient for you to use these models, to run these models locally, and then it also provides a Visual Studio Code extension. In fact, what we're now doing with Tabby can be also done with Codellama, and the way you would do that is by downloading a third-party extension instead of Tabby. So in that case, you would need to download something like Llama Coder. So basically here is a third-party extension which will allow you to use Codellama, which would again be run locally, to link it to Visual Studio Code. But in my experience, Tabby just does a better job, so we're gonna go with Tabby. Now, having that said, let's go back into our project here, and we're not going to be wasting more time on Codellama since it is irrelevant to this video, but we will be going in depth on how to use Tabby. And if we go into the installation section, you will see that one of the options here is using Docker, and unless you want to specifically use one of the other options, I do recommend using Docker in this case. And as you can see, this gives you two commands, but before we jump into this, we should specify what Docker is and why do we use Docker. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Docker, I do recommend watching a separate video explaining what Docker is and how it works, because it is a complex topic and it requires understanding of how Docker is run. But if you don't care about that, you can just go onto docker.com and download Docker. Now, Docker will allow us to run Tabby on our machine regardless of the operating system. So it doesn't matter if you have a MacBook or if you have something else, you can pretty much run Docker anywhere, and then you can run a simple command to run Tabby on your machine, given that you have Docker installed, regardless of your operating system. So that's the beauty of Docker. You have containers and images which you can deploy and run on any operating system. And again, I highly recommend studying Docker in depth because it is a really incredible and useful tool. Now, having that said, after you download Docker, you have two options. If you have an Nvidia GPU, then you can use the first option, which is essentially going to allow you to run Tabby on your GPU. So you need to have an Nvidia GPU and CUDA support. Otherwise, you can use the CPU version, and here is a different command for the CPU version. Now, in both of these commands, you will see that the model is in here. So if you want to use a different model, you want to go to the models registry and just copy the model that you want to use simply by copying the name, and then you can go back, you can copy this command to a text document, and you can replace the model with the model that you want to use. And before we continue, if you do want to use the Nvidia CUDA version, so if you want to run your container on your GPU, you will need to download two things. The first one is the CUDA toolkit, and you can just Google that, and this will bring you to the download page. And from here, you can go to Windows and then select your architecture, the Windows version, and then you can download the exe file. And once you do that, you can go through the installation steps to install CUDA. After you're done with installing CUDA, you will need to also go through another series of steps. And here I have a different guide, which is called CUDA on WSL User Guide. And you can Google that to find this exact article. But the idea here is that you simply want to go down here and you want to make sure that you have the necessary NVIDIA drivers installed. So do check if you have the latest drivers installed. And then you want to run wsl.exe --install, and then you want to run wsl.exe --update, and then you're good to go. So I think you can skip pretty much everything else. This is the only thing you will need to do. And with that done, you should be able to run this command without any failure. So now the next step is to actually copy this command, and let me bring up a simple notepad. Before we proceed, let me paste this command in here and explain what this does. So the first set of parameters here simply says that we want to run a Docker container, and in this case we're setting these parameters, so it, GPUs and all. So these parameters alongside with device CUDA allows you to run whatever you're running on GPU. And this is a set of ports, so your application will be running on port 8080, and you can change that if you want to, but I do recommend leaving it at 8080, and this is the external port and this is the internal port. So when you want to access your application from the outside, so outside of Docker, you will be essentially listening to this port, and if you don't define this port, you won't be able to access your application properly. Now, having that said, the important part is this part right here, and then also this part right here, which is our model. And in here, as I've mentioned before, you can replace this with a different model, like the 7 billion parameter model. But in here, you have to pay attention to this format right here. And this is the path to your data folder. So by default, inside of your container, you will have a data folder, and the data folder in question will contain your models. So let me pull up a folder here, and as you can see in here, I have a specific folder in which I have a .tabby folder, and then in that folder I have a models folder, and then there is a TabbyML folder, and then I have my StarCoder model. Now, this folder structure, so basically this folder is located on an external drive of mine, which is my D volume, and basically I've decided that I want my Tabby models to be placed in here. Now, by default, you can see that we have this $home/.tabby location, and if you're using Windows, this is going to be invalid for you. So if you're using Windows, you might want to do something a little bit different. So basically, instead of saying home, you can just say percentage, and then you can say user profile, and then percentage again. And effectively, what this does is that it points to your user folder. So for example, on Windows, you have the default folder with your username, for example, Alex. And then inside of that folder, you have your downloads folder, your desktop folder, etc. And if you do that, then this will point to your user folder. Now, then it will try to create a .tabby folder, if it does not already exist, inside of your user folder, and it will try to download the model that you want inside of your user folder. Now, if you don't want the model to be downloaded inside of your user folder, you can simply provide a path, a different path. So for example, you can say something like this. So let's remove that. And this is exactly the folder that you're seeing right now. So I have a .tabby folder here, and I want all of my models and everything related to Tabby to be located in here. So basically the first argument here is the folder that you're trying to use for Tabby on your machine, and then you have a colon here, and then you have the corresponding folder inside of your Docker container. So it is linking those two locations, and in Docker terms, it is mounting this folder inside of this location here. So basically this is important because if you don't set it up correctly, then you're gonna have issues, and you do need to know where your .tabby folder is. And after you've done that, after you've selected a location for your .tabby folder and you have linked it to your container, we can move on and we can actually run this command. So in this case, let me run this command with the StarCoder 1B model here. So let me just copy that and let me open a terminal. And in fact, before we do that, we can paste this command by right-clicking if you're on Windows, but I do want to change the port. So in this case, let me just use a different port. So let's say 11431, and now let's try and press enter. And I did that because if we actually go into my Docker application for Windows, which we're going to be exploring in a second, if you go into containers, you will be able to see that in here I already have an application listening to port 8080, and by the way we can delete this, so that's fine. So this is an application listening to port 8080, and this is my currently running Tabby instance, which is running the 3 billion parameter model. And then here I also have a new container which is being currently generated, and this container right here will be listening to port 11431, and as you can see, the model has been successfully downloaded, and now it is trying to initialize the server in question. However, this will take time, and this usually takes several minutes, and while it does that, I want to mention something. So when you do this process, there is a chance that it will fail, or you may see a bunch of errors stating that something went wrong. Now, I want you to go back into your Tabby folder, and then go back into the Tabby website and go into the model registry. So from here, you want to copy the name of the model. You don't want to click this, you just want to copy the name, and you want to Google that. And that will bring you to the corresponding page right here. So this is the model in question. And from here, you can go to Files and Versions. And we want to essentially clone this too. So basically we want this on our machine, so we can just click on this button right here, and we can click on Clone Repository. And in this case, we care about this line right here. We can copy that, make sure that you have Git installed on your machine. And if you don't, you can just go ahead and say Git install. And in my case, I can say Windows. And from here, you can just go through the process, select your version, and install Git on your machine. And then you can go into any directory. So for now, we can go ahead, and as you can see here, we already have the folder in question. So let's create a new folder. And let's bring up a terminal at this location. And if we just say git clone, this will start cloning the folder in question. So we already have it, we don't need it. But if you encounter any problems with the download process in here, you can always git clone the corresponding repository manually, and then you can try and run your container again. So you don't need to restart the process by running this command, because your container will already exist by this point. All you need to do is pull up your Docker terminal, and in here you will see containers, images, and volumes. And you care about the containers section, and you will see a new container here, and there will be a button to run this container, and you can just click on it and it will attempt to run the container again. And if you go into any of the running containers, you can see the logs here, and you can execute commands through here if you need to. So in this case, we have a second server running currently, and all we need to do is go into VS Code. We can click on Tabby, we can go to Settings, and by default, Tabby will listen to port 8080. But if you want to change that, you can just say HTTP localhost, and then let's add our port. So I believe this is correct. And now if we go back in here, I believe that everything should work fine. So in fact, let's go and stop our 3 billion model just to make sure. So this is our 3 billion model, and let's just click on stop. And the currently running model is the 1 billion parameter model. So while this is stopping, this should not work without a valid model. So let's see if this works. And Tabby is running. And as you can see, it works perfectly well. Obviously, the suggestions here are a bit chaotic, and this model is worse in terms of performance. But let's see if it can suggest anything. It just says initialize IMAP, and it creates an IMAP object here without much context, but basically it works. So yeah, this is exactly what you need to do to run a model locally. So basically the steps are very simple. I may have taken some extra time to explain a few things, but the idea is that you simply go into Tabby, you go into the documentation, you go into the installation section, select your installation method, and then run either one of these commands, and make sure that you have CUDA installed if you want to use that. You copy that, you run that inside of a terminal, and then you go to VS Code, make sure that Tabby is in fact installed. So let's remove that. So you make sure that Tabby is installed. You want to go to the settings, and if you are running the default port, you don't need this, you can just remove that. As you can see right now, it says that Tabby is not connected because we removed the endpoint and there is nothing running on 8080 at the moment. And that's basically it. You can use any endpoint you want here. You can use any of the available models, depending on how beefy your computer is. And with that, you have your own self-hosting coding assistant. And in the future, when more models are released, maybe when better models are released, maybe Copilot will not be as relevant for people in the know, since most people will prefer to take some time to set up their own assistant rather than pay for a third-party solution which uses their data as well. And yeah, that's about it. I really hope this video was helpful. This is a new channel. I'm experimenting with content here, so make sure to subscribe. And I promise you, I will be uploading some very cool stuff in the future. And my next video, in fact, is about making your own webmail client. So be sure to look out for that, and I'll see you in the next one.